Deep in the forest near the village of Schmidt, a fire is lit that must be carefully controlled. In today's Age Skills History episode, Franz and Hubert demonstrate the traditional craft of charcoal burning. At a former charcoal site in the Kermeter, they show how a kiln is fired and later cleared. They have spent the past week building a mound of 80 cubic meters of beech wood, sealed with leaves and charcoal dust. At the top of the kiln, next to the central flue, Hubert lights the starter fire. He uses charcoal for this, which ignites faster than wood. Mixed in are also some brands, partially charred pieces from a previous burn. The collier now tosses handfuls of charcoal into the flue so the flames can reach deep to the bottom. He gradually fills the shaft with the remaining charcoal from the sack. The Düsterer Valley drops steeply toward the charcoal site. The small stream lies 150 meters away, still at the same elevation as the kiln hearth. The colliers have run a hose line from there, and water flows steadily into a galvanized tub beside the kiln. This collected water is enough for tending the kiln. When drawing out the charcoal, however, they'll also set up a water barrel for additional storage. At the base of the mound, Hubert Stollenwerk opens the air vents. During the slow burn, these openings allow the colliers to control the oxygen supply inside the kiln. Every 4 meters or so, he clears away the covering of leaves and earth down to the stacked cordwood. He punches 7 or 8 of these vents, each about 10 centimeters across, into the wall. The charring process can now begin. Into the central flue, the collier places a pole, a spruce sapling used to distribute the fuel. Inside, the fire follows its course, shown here schematically. The kiln crown ignites. At the bottom of the central flue, charcoal is poured in. The fire is fed into the shaft. The colliers then fill it to the top with charcoal. The opening is capped with a sod of turf so the kiln will draw air through the vents. The fire first burns downward, then gradually works its way back up. Along the sides of the central flue, flames now catch the surrounding beech logs. As water vapor is driven off, the fuel mass shrinks. Every half hour, the colliers must add fresh fuel down the shaft. First, they feed it charcoal, later green wood. The kiln must be stoked. The fire continues to advance. Depending on the wood's moisture content, it takes 1 to 2 days for the kiln's center to burn through completely. This phase demands constant attention from the colliers. They must regularly feed the kiln with fuel to keep it burning. Once the coals in the shaft reach the top of the kiln, the second phase begins. Now the smouldering fire spreads outward on its own without additional fuel. From this point forward, the colliers guide the charring process from top to bottom by carefully adjusting or relocating the draft vents and smoke holes. Back at the kiln, Hubert Stollenwerk tamps down the coals in the shaft. He fills the resulting hollow with charcoal. By prodding with the pole, he settles the glowing coals downward, where they gradually ignite the surrounding wood. He caps the opening with a turf sod so the kiln draws air from below through the vents. This forces the coals upward through the shaft. Two sacks of green wood already sit ready on top. The kiln needs repeated stoking. More firewood will be needed. Wolfgang Stollenwerk has arrived at the site and begins sawing fresh billets. Late in the afternoon, the colliers change shifts at the kiln. Heavier smoke pours from the central flue. The cap no longer seals properly. Franz Stollenwerk places a fresh turf sod over the crown and adds more fuel. Breezy weather actually helps the charring process. The kiln gets more oxygen and finishes faster, as the colliers say. The thick white smoke indicates that water vapor, moisture being driven from the wood, is escaping. The color and thickness of the smoke tells them how the fire is progressing inside the kiln. By evening of the first day, the fire has burned through the central shaft. The first night watch begins. Over the coming days, they'll work in pairs, taking 8-hour shifts at the site. Using poles, stakes, and cut turf, they've built a lean-to shelter. Such rough huts were once common wherever charcoal was made. Franz and Klaus Stollenwerk make their first nighttime rounds. Every 3 hours, they circle the kiln to check whether it's charring evenly and whether the vents remain clear. At the top, they inspect the smoke holes. Just as during the initial lighting, water is being driven from the wood. The difference now is that this happens without adding fuel from outside. At this stage, The kiln essentially runs itself through the airtight cover and high internal heat, but that doesn't mean it can be left unattended. When the smoke turns bluish and transparent, that section has finished charring. This hasn't happened yet. In fact, on the left side, the charring is proceeding too slowly. Franz Stollenwerk punches 5 more holes with his poker. For now, the tending is done. The collier can rest for 3 hours. Working through the night at a glowing kiln gave charcoal burners a peculiar place in rural life. Spending weeks away from home, working alone in the forest at this grimy trade, they often stood outside the normal patterns of village life. The black art lives on in countless proverbs and sayings. Charcoal burners also appear in fairy tales and folk stories. The next morning brings a quick briefing at the shift change. The work repeats itself. While Wolfgang Stollenwerk checks the draft vents, Hubert inspects the progress of the top. Twice a day, they tread down the finished charcoal on the crown to compress the voids that form as volatile substances escape. Air pockets could otherwise cause cave-ins or flash fires. This phase demands intensive labor. That's why colliers traditionally built 2 kilns side by side at a site, staggering their burns so both could be tended efficiently. The Stollenwerks recall pairing a 90 cubic meter kiln with a 60 cubic meter one. In the 16th and 17th centuries, charcoal production for ironworks grew enormously. As early as 1550, territorial lords tried to curb the unchecked forest exploitation through ordinances. The sheer number of such decrees shows they had little effect. Often the lords themselves owned ironworks and economic interests won out. Many areas, like the Monschau forest, had become heathland by this time. Records even mention fruit trees and fence palings being charred. Lawsuits and trade bans against individual colliers followed. Even these measures couldn't prevent dramatic changes to the Eifel landscape. With the iron industry's decline in the mid-19th century, the heath gradually returned to forest. The kiln on the morning of the fourth day. A smaller cone of fully charred wood has formed at the center of the crown. Franz Stollenwerk treads down the edges to compact the wood and advance the charring. The heat has made the outer layer porous and permeable. Fresh earth must be spread over it, otherwise a strong gust could ignite the exposed glowing charcoal underneath. This schematic shows the process from day 2 through day 6 after lighting. The central flue has burned through completely. Now the fire spreads outward. Draft vents at the base control the oxygen supply. At the top, the shaft stays sealed. Here's the kiln in cross-section. Starting on the third day, the colliers punch a ring of smoke holes around the mound so water vapor and gases can escape. White smoke immediately pours out. Once the wood layer above these openings has charred, the smoke changes. It becomes bluish and see-through. That's the signal to move the smoke holes down about half a meter. This way they guide the smouldering fire gradually from crown to base. Back to the cross-section. As the mound's diameter increases, each layer takes up to 12 hours to char completely. Wood condition and weather also play a role. As volatile compounds are driven off, the kiln changes shape. The charred wood shrinks both lengthwise and around its girth. Each day the mound loses about half a meter of height. By the time it's emptied, its volume will have shrunk by 55 to 60%. The smoke holes now sit just above the draft vents. Coals have nearly reached the hearth. Inside, temperatures reach 270 degrees Celsius. This heat and airtight seal drive off the wood's gaseous and liquid components. What remains is porous carbon, charcoal. The kiln has now charred completely. After cooling for a day, the colliers begin drawing it out. Barely any smoke rises now, meaning the top layer is done. Hans Stollenwerk punches fresh openings in the wall. White vapor immediately escapes. The smoke holes form a zigzag pattern around the kiln, spaced about 40 centimeters apart vertically and horizontally. This arrangement serves a purpose. Lower holes ensure the green wood behind them chars, while upper holes keep the nearly finished charcoal burning. When punching the upper row, the collier can tell by feel and sound how far down the charring has progressed. The hot steam mixed with wood acid damages not only the surrounding trees, but also the collier's lungs. Respiratory ailments were common in this trade. Leaves and earth form a dense, insulating blanket over the stacked wood, essential to the charring process. Sunny spots dry out faster. This lets outside air in and the kiln chars unevenly, so the colliers keep the cover constantly damp. Filled watering cans stand ready beside the galvanized tub so they can quickly douse small flare-ups. Hubert and Wolfgang Stollenwerk spot a cave-in on the kiln's wall. Cave-ins happen when wind pushes unevenly on the mound, or when voids form because finished charcoal wasn't tramped down properly. Either way, the coals get too much oxygen and the wood burns to ash instead of charring. This spot must be opened quickly or the whole kiln could catch fire. The flames die down once the charcoal is packed tight again. After dousing it thoroughly, they seal the hole. Over it goes a layer of turf or leaves, topped with charcoal dust, just like when building the kiln. The charring will resume on its own. If a cave-in goes unnoticed, a large cavity forms as wood burns to ash. Colliers could fall through the crown during maintenance and get hurt. This charcoal site in the Duisterabach Valley sits very close to the reservoir. Smoke from the kiln is visible from far off and drifts across the road to Gmund when the wind's right. Since the early 1960s, they've posted a warning sign here. With more tourists came more false reports of forest fires. On the fifth day, smoke holes sit only a meter above the hearth. High internal temperatures dry out the walls very quickly. The mound's diameter is now so large that each layer takes about 12 hours to char. With water needs increasing, they've added another barrel at the site. Weather plays a critical role in kiln charcoal making. Ideal conditions are dry days with moderate breeze. In hot, still weather, the kiln gets too little oxygen. It won't draw. Strong winds supply too much oxygen, causing uneven charring or even ignition. Entire kilns often burned because the danger went unnoticed. Such fires can barely be put out and easily spread through the surrounding forest. Down low, maintaining good airflow becomes increasingly difficult. Wolfgang Stollenwerk carefully widens existing vents and punches new ones to ensure complete charring all the way to the base. His uncle positions the smoke holes based on how the fire's progressing. Where the earth on the wall is black, green wood still lies underneath. There he needs to speed up the charring. Once fully charred, the kiln must cool for about 24 hours. Even then, someone needs to watch it. The next morning, after 7 days of working in pairs around the clock, all the men gather at the site to break open the kiln. High temperatures still linger inside, so they work in sections around the perimeter. The charcoal is doused, turned repeatedly, and shoveled to the edge of the hearth to cool completely. At each opened section, there's real danger of exposed glowing pieces flashing up. So the dried outer layer, leaves, earth and charcoal dust, is also quenched and immediately spread back over the cleared area. This seals the charcoal's pores and smothers any remaining coals. They call this damping down the kiln. Until the mid-19th century, charcoal mainly supplied the enormous demands of ironworks. Household use for heating, laundry, ironing, or by local tradesmen was insignificant by comparison. With the introduction of cheaper, more abundant coal, charcoal lost its dominance in iron smelting. New markets opened in the chemical industry, which needed charcoal in various forms for processing. This required cheaper, more efficient production methods. Most importantly, producers tried to capture the valuable byproducts that escape from kiln charring as gases and vapors. Through the 1920s, wood distillation plants were built that initially produced solid and liquid charcoal products in simple retort furnaces. As industrial technology advanced, centuries-old kiln charcoal making gradually faded away. Literally standing on the hot coals, Franz Stollenwerk. Even the kiln's surface is still so hot he has to cool his boots. The colliers take care to keep the water in the galvanized tub clean, so ash and debris don't get into the watering cans. Since the cans are dipped to fill, they always rest on wood blocks while working. Drawing out the charcoal is the hardest and dirtiest part of the whole process. The slowly cooling charcoal at the edges needs constant watching, as does the ash-covered core at the center. It takes 3 to 4 days to empty the kiln and haul away the bagged charcoal. Even the following day, the kiln's core still holds glowing pieces. Charcoal is 80% carbon and 15% oxygen, with small amounts of hydrogen, nitrogen, and ash making up the rest. This kiln, built from 80 cubic meters of beech, will yield about 200 hundredweight of charcoal. Yield depends on quality and especially moisture content. As a rule of thumb, 4 units by weight of air-dried beech produce 1 unit of charcoal. By volume, the yield runs 20 to 25%. So charcoal making, beyond the considerable labor of these 8 days, isn't a very efficient process. The Stollenwerk supplied metalworks and brass mills in Eschweiler and Stolberg, plus ironworks in Eilendorf, Lendersdorf, and Kalb. Their charcoal served as filter material and in processing metal alloys, as well as for grilling and artists' charcoal. Usually they delivered straight to buyers, pre-sorted into coarse and fine grades. Only for distant customers was it temporarily stored in Schmidt. Meanwhile, small piles of charcoal cool around the hearth. The colliers pick out brands, pieces that didn't char completely and can't be sold. In the kiln's core, where the central flue once stood, Hans Stollenwerk finds an iron hoop that reinforced the spruce poles. As in so many trades, industrial methods replaced traditional craftsmanship in charcoal making within a few decades. Hubert and Franz Stollenwerk moved to other work in the late 1960s, when charcoal making was no longer profitable. The next generation could hardly be expected to learn this craft. Recently, there's been an effort to keep the old method of kiln charcoal making from being completely forgotten. In regions where it was traditionally practiced, the Eifel, Sauerland and Hunsrück, retired colliers demonstrate their craft to the public, sometimes along forest trails. Open-air museums and tourism boards have also responded to what seems to be genuine public interest in this vanishing trade.